Yeah. We now welcome Dr. Olivier, who is the chair at the UK chapter of Internet Society. In the past, he has also chaired the at-large advisory committee at Icann. Dr. Olivier is here to give you the necessary exposure and experience through this session on Internet Governance 101, as well as the importance of youth engagement in IG. We are sure it will help you build on your knowledge of the ecosystem. This session will be 30 minutes long, followed by 10 minutes for taking up any questions. And we request you to put down all of your questions into the chat box for this. And I welcome you, sir, to take the session forward. We're really excited to have you here.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. And first thing I wanted to do was to just quickly test my audio. Am I legible or is it not that great?
We can hear you, sir.
It's okay, yeah? It's good. All right. Because I've got another way. Let me just check another audio, and you'll tell me which one is better. Let's try this one. Is that better?
Yeah, this is better.
This one is better. Okay, excellent. All right. Well, thank you for having invited me to address the Youth IGF India. I'm really excited because it's I've always been really interested in being able to share some of the little bit of things that I know about the internet, and a few years later then find these people that I met a number of years earlier suddenly assuming responsibilities, then having grown into a specific job and things. So it's really exciting to be here, and I guess we can probably start with my presentation. Now I don't see it on the screen at the moment. I guess it will appear.
We'll just share it in a second.
Okay, excellent. So effectively, I'm here to talk to you for the next 30 minutes about first a little bit of history of the internet, and then also the various organizations that are involved in internet governance, because it's not just a single organization that deals with everything. There is a whole range of organizations that you will see in this space. I'm going to go really fast. I think it's something like 60 something slides, but most of them are just like pictorial, quite straightforward. And then we'll have questions over at the end. For those people that have already attended the INSIG, you will see that it's pretty much the same presentation. So, or at least very similar to the presentation there. And I guess I'm just waiting for the slides to start coming up, being shared, and then we can proceed forward. I must say that I know it's a lot to fit in one go, but okay. Oh, where are we? There's going to be a lot of things to fit in one go, but I guess you've probably heard a lot of this, and I'm so happy that Anya has already spoken before me, because she's already spoken a lot about the Internet Governance Forum, which certainly helps a lot. This is not ideal, by the way, at the moment. Should I try and...
Yeah, I think that would be better. I've received a PDF version of this.
Yeah. What I can do is to share my screen if you want.
Yeah, I think that would be better. I'll try and see if I can put it in PPT, but I think that'll take a little longer.
All right. Can you see this?
Yes, this is better. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. All right, let's go. Let's launch then. All right, so we're going to be talking first about some of the historical parts of the internet. And one thing is that there is not just one wave of internet development, but there are actually 5 waves of internet governance that all came about with the way that the network was started and then what it evolved into. Originally, it was all paid for by the US military. There was a whole story about Sputnik being the satellite that was launched into space by the Russians, and Kennedy being rather upset about this and deciding that there would be a number of projects that would be finished by the end of the 60s. One of them was to put someone on the moon, and that's a whole other story, but one of them was to do with having a military network that would be able to sustain a nuclear attack, that would be able to provide communication to all of the forces. and everything had to be invented from scratch, basically. So they started with the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, and they created the ARPANET. Then in the 70s, things went a little bit more academic, and so a lot of universities started getting involved, and you got universities involved. Then, of course, in the 90s, with the invention of the World Wide Web, everything became commercial. And then after that, you started having faster speeds of access, both with mobile devices, but also at home and in offices, and therefore we started moving into this mass media part, the likes of YouTube and video, voice video, all this. And now it's pretty much everything, because most of what we see out there is actually social media. So it's like everyone and everyone connecting together and sharing things. So on top of that, you have a new complexity that's coming up with the new generations, like 4G, 5G, all of the Internet of Things, etc., etc. So the 5 ways are effectively here. We're going to start at the very beginning. And the first thing we're going to look at is, okay, the Internet developed in the 60s based on the Internet Engineering Task Force technical specifications. They're not standards as such, but they're just specifications that anybody who wants to get connected to the Internet would need to follow if they wanted their device to work with other devices out there. It's a distributed system. There's not a single owner of this network. And the whole network works on a system called the domain name system, and that's since the 1980s. And we'll see that in a moment. So the ecosystem in itself, as I said, it has got no single ownership. And the standards for this are open, so anybody is really allowed to come in and add some more standards to what are already there. And because the internet is so open, so transparent, and because of this lack of single ownership, so therefore, in a way, permissionless innovation, you end up with something that becomes very, very innovative and that grew at an incredible rate. And in fact, when it grew commercially in the 90s, it was such fast numbers of growth that most people that you would speak to would look at you sideways and think you might have made a mistake in the speed at which you thought this thing was growing. The model in itself, as it goes at the moment, relies on bottom-up policy development and on a lot of different organizations. And you can see here, this was a graphic done by the Internet Society quite some time ago, with showing, in effect, the number of different organizations that were involved in the different facets, component parts of the Internet, from the technical side of things to the societal side of things, to standards, to the different user groups, of course, governments, private sector, civil society, all working together. Initially, it just started like this, September 1969. So, they just sent someone on the moon, and now that's it. It was time to do this demonstration. Let's get 2 computers to talk together. And it worked. Just a single word was sent over. It crashed right away. But a few months later, in December, you can see that you ended up with a few more what we call nodes connected together into the ARPA network. So the first packet switching node was in 1969, and immediately after that, there was a requirement, a need to be able to have some tracking of the standards of the development. And this is where Steve Crocker, a name that you might have remembered, that might have already been mentioned to you, Steve Crocker, who was part of this development group that put together this technical standard, said, hey, we need some kind of way to track this, and we'll call it a request for comments. So we'll publish a paper and we'll ask for feedback for comments, and short for RFC, effectively. RFCs are the standards of the Internet. They're not mandatory, but as I said earlier, if you don't follow them, you're unlikely to get your service to work with other services. By 1971, a lot more computers started getting connected, as you can see. And in 1974, a different protocol, which is the kind of language used by the computers to talk to each other, was developed. And it was developed by 2 gentlemen, chap called Bob Kahn and someone called Vint Cerf, and you might have heard of them as well. They are often credited as being the fathers of the internet, or at least the fathers of the modern internet, because the internet has been using TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol / Internet Protocol, ever since 1974, the time when they developed this and then moved things in the next year over to this. Email was invented, a number of other services were invented, and the networks grew at an incredible rate. You can see here in 85, so you're jumping ahead 10 years later, and you've got the ARPANET, which is one cluster. You've got the military network, which is another cluster. And then we've got also a SATNet, a satellite network that has started operating here. So it wasn't just solely a US-based network, but a number of other locations started connecting. The United Kingdom, Norway, so various places in Europe, and soon enough, it started going even further than that. In 85, the domain name system was introduced. Now, all the way until 1985, the way to add more hosts on the internet with the names, and then you had the names, and you had next to that an IP address, Internet Protocol address. The Internet Protocol address was just a numbered address, very difficult to remember. So there was some translation in a host file that would have the name of a host and then the Internet address, the IP address next to it. The problem was that every time a new computer was added, you needed to make an addition to this, and it was crazy. It started growing so quickly. So they designed the domain name system, which was a hierarchical system where you had MIL for military, Gov for government, Com for commercial, Net for networks, Org for pretty much anything else, and Edu for the educational sector. And each one of these sectors would be in charge of their own pyramid to add domain names under that. In '89, with the mix of having students from universities and also military and also government organizations on the same network, one started to see a lot of hacking going on. Obviously, if you're going to hack someplace, you want to go for something really, really big and important. Remember, there was also a game called, a film called, I think was it War Games that came up at the time. So it became really trendy to go and try and launch a global thermonuclear war back in those days, thinking you could do that. And therefore, the military network decided to separate itself from everyone else and have its own network with some highly secure gateways. A commercial service started also at the same time. Now remember, this is '89. This is just before the World Wide Web. This is just with text services. And we'll see that in a moment. But already there was a company that felt it was maybe there was some way to go commercial about this. In fact, most of the internet was still paid for by the UX taxpayer. But you can see that it grew from 80,000 nodes, 80,000 computers to 160,000 in just a few months. And so more and more commercial players arrived. And the network started fragmenting into sub-networks where you had an academic network on one side and a more commercialized network on the other. And everything worked with peering agreements. Peering agreements are when you have two service providers, provider A discusses with provider B and makes an agreement where provider A will carry all of the traffic of provider B, when provider B will carry all the traffic of provider A. And this is still the way the internet works today, where if you connect from India to a place in the United States, it will go through several different networks that will all have peering agreements between each other. And so you'll have some networks in the middle that will neither have you as a client on one side or on the other side, but that will still carry the traffic because everyone carries everyone else's traffic. This whole multiplication of interconnections became a little difficult to deal with, especially when it came down to having two service providers located in the same country, but connected to the internet in a third country. And that's where the first commercial internet exchange came up. It's the first one that was what we call an Internet Exchange Point, an IXP. And what it was basically was that instead of connecting long distance to a place outside the country, then they could connect locally, and then basically traffic will be carried locally between two service providers. You can see how this came up. That's just before the World Wide Web. These are the services that were around back then: email, file transfer protocol, and things like Gopher. I don't know if anybody of you has heard about this. I'll show you in a second. Gopher was a text-based system which was still based on hypertext. So you could use your arrows going up and down, or you could type the number, and that would then take you to a subdirectory with the information. But you can see it's all based in text. It's only when Tim Berners-Lee in 1992 thought, I can improve on this, and decided to invent hypertext markup language, a language that computers could use to be able to display full information with voice, video, text, data, all on the page. It's at that point that the PCs, becoming more powerful, really made a difference, because at that point you went from text to full multimedia capability. And this is one of the first pages actually that came out back then. This is an original copy, and this is something I did back then, a copy of the first IBM web page with a browser called NCSA Mosaic. That was also one of the first browsers. And you can see it has already most of what we understand today with the document resource and the document title. And you've also got, if you look very carefully on the page, you're going to see some places with a little speaker. You could click on the little speaker, and that would provide you with the chap Lou Gessner, who was the chap at the time, the chairman of IBM, actually saying his text and so on. It was just another world. It wouldn't work most of the time because the network was too slow, but it was still a huge step forward. And from this point onwards, the internet went into this commercialization at an incredible pace, with some of the services that you see here still existing today and some of them not. And you can see that Google only started in 1998. It was years after a number of other services. And it's only in 2005 that YouTube started this video sharing craze and madness. In November 93, so just at that very moment, India already had full internet access, as you can see on this map, but a number of other countries did not have internet access. And just in a few years, you can see that everything ended up having full internet access. Just a handful of countries did not have it at the time, potentially because of the difficulty in getting internet access in some regions. Places like Afghanistan, for example, had a war at the time, so that was not exactly particularly easy. But most places became very quickly on internet access. And you can see that very quickly, lots of interconnection by satellites, using subsea lines and so on. It just went everywhere. What was really important is that the end user principle stayed as it was. So any type of traffic was allowed. There was no filtering. It's as I said, a champion for innovation, because a lot of very small companies at the beginning, the Yahoos, the Googles, these guys were very small to start with, and they became very big very fast because people liked the services that they were providing. All of that brought this whole interest into who is going to govern this thing. And so the World Group on Internet, Working Group on Internet Governance, a working group that had been established by the United Nations, looked at this and said, well, we need to work on first a definition of internet governance. And that's, I think, a key definition, which a lot of people will quote to you. It's that internet governance is the development and application by governments, the private sector, and civil society in their respective roles of shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and the use of the internet. Prior to 2005, there was no such definition. And I think that from here, you will, if you know this definition, you'll understand a lot more, many of the discussions that we are having today, because we still base our aim for running the internet on this definition as such. The whole workout of how the internet is run, as I said, it's so many different organizations working together. Diplo did this wonderful diagram, which you might have seen, which looks like it's totally chaotic. They actually structured it a little bit more a couple of years later. And in a way here, you can see that running the internet and internet governance is it's not something just technical for geeks. It's actually something that includes human rights and sociocultural issues and economic development. cybersecurity, all the legal side of things. And of course, you can see here on the left-hand side the number of organizations that are involved in internet governance. And I'm now going to take you through a handful of these organizations. First, the Internet Society. It was founded in 1992. In fact, some of the founding fathers of the Internet Society were the people that put together the internet, Vint Cerf being one of them. It's a not-for-profit organization that has a vision, or that had a vision at the beginning, which said the internet is for everyone. And it has worked ever since 1992 to continue the spread of the internet and the use of the internet around the world. And I guess it's been pretty successful at it, from how many people are on the internet today. There are lots of local chapters, as you can see, lots of chapters in India, lots of chapters everywhere around Europe and Latin America and in Africa as well. The Internet Society is the home for two sub-organizations. The Internet Architecture Board on one side, it's like a committee of the Internet Engineering Task Force, and the IETF that I mentioned earlier, which has now evolved into its own organization that is a wholly owned organization of the Internet Society. And that's the organization that deals with the technical standards. Icann is another organization, nothing to do with ISOC. It was created in 1998, and it was meant to replace the US government in the functions that are running the allocation of domain names and internet protocol addresses, so the IP addresses. And it deals also with all of the policy making for these. So the domain names, as you know, this is the anatomy of domain names, like you can hear, for example, www.meetings.icann.org. So the top level domain is .org. Just like I mentioned earlier, there was .mil, .net, and now, of course, there are quantities more top-level domains. There's even some country code top-level domains, like .in for India. And then you've got the second-level domain, which is the names that people register. And so all of this needs to have some kind of rules set up worldwide for consumers, for people to be able to purchase these and use them and transfer them if they need to transfer them, etc. The whole system is based on the root servers. The root servers are a pyramid with a single point at the top of the pyramid that publishes the zone file. The zone file is effectively the .net, .org, .edu, .in. The zone file contains all of these top-level domains, and it's a hierarchy that needs to be updated from time to time, and that is crucial in the running of the internet. There are 13 root servers. Well, there were 13 root servers originally. There still are 13 root servers. And you can see that we're primarily based in the United States because of the fact, of course, that the network started up in the US. But over time, some instances, some copies of this root servers have now sprung up everywhere and have been made everywhere with agreements to have a local copy of these. There are many of these in India, as you can see. I can see here 11 of them, 1,329 instances. So even if today hackers manage to pull down 1, 2, 3, 10, 20 instances of the root servers, you can see that the internet will still remain very, very stable indeed. Then you've got the regional internet registries. They are organizations that will distribute the IP addresses to the different users or to internet service providers that will then use them with you. It's important. Every computer on the internet needs an IP address. It's a single address that they need to have. And these regional internet registries, there are 5 of them. And for India, it's APINIC that is in charge of this. Then there's the World Wide Web Consortium, and that deals only with the top part. So that's all to do with the presentation of the web, if you want, the web pages, the formatting, the HTML, all of that. And that develops the web standards. And it's really to continue, it continues being led by Tim Berners-Lee and Jeffrey Jaff. So they work on this level. And then there's also the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. Now that organization predates everyone because originally it was dealing with telegraph communications. It was created in 1865. It kind of it kind of missed the boat in the early 90s or the 80s and the 90s, because it wasn't really intended to be influencing the internet's development, but it certainly developed some standards for connection of modems. So your V21, some people might remember this, V21, X25, old standards that were used for quite some time. The ITU is structured in a very conventional way. It's got the World's Telecommunications Standardization Assembly and the Telecommunications Standardization Advisory Group, part of ITU technical field. Then you have ITU development field with the World Telecommunication Development Conference and the Telecommunication Development Advisory Group. And then on the left-hand side, you've got the World Radio Conference. We don't really deal much with this. This is to do with radio allocation. So for example, when the 3G licensing or 4G licenses for your mobile phone here were used, of course, you need to have some kind of standardization that they are the same in all the countries around the world. Otherwise, your phone wouldn't be working from one country to another. So it's really important, but the technical and the development sector are the ones that are pertinent to the internet. The International Telecommunication Regulations were a 1988 treaty to establish general principles for telecommunications. But you notice 1988 was just before the World Wide Web, so it didn't have much to do with the internet as such. But in December 2012, there was an update to this, a conference that took place in Dubai, with the idea that they could be updated and that countries could sign upon these. Unfortunately, due to the nature of, I guess, different strategies by different countries, and certainly a concern from many countries about the internet being taken over by governments and pulled away from this multi-stakeholder system, there were a number of signatories, or a number of countries did not sign on this. So we're still in a little bit of a mess on that. In the meantime, the World Telecommunication Policy Forum, held in May 2013, was a follow-up to this. And then the World Telecommunication Development Conference in 2017 followed up on that. But in each one of these, of course, the ITU doesn't only talk about internet, which is just a small part. The ITU was looking at pretty much everything else. The overall ICTs, information communication technologies, ICT. That's it. And finally, the Plenipots. They organize this every 4 years, I think it is. Yeah, 4 yearly treaty conference, and they can create treaties. The last one was in Dubai. I think we're looking at the next one. Well, we're not quite sure when, because now with all this COVID, it's a bit of a problem with all of these. So a lot of this will take place online, will follow up online. The UN has got a number of processes. And of course, the biggest one that we know with regards to the internet is the Internet Governance Forum. But you can see here the UNESCO, the UN General Assembly also are looking at various facets, component parts of the internet, mostly around cybersecurity, around access issues, development in nations that do not have enough access. And it was also the organizer of the World Summit on Information Society in 2005, where this working group on internet governance provided the starting point to build the IGF, but also this definition of internet governance. The WISIS plus 10 review took place in 2015, I guess, 2005 plus 10. And it was sanctioned by 2 review sessions in 2013 and 14. And that's what gave rise to the IGF now evolving perhaps into more than what it was before, although this is still in discussion. We've spoken about the IGF a number of times. It's just around the corner, 9th to 17th of November. I guess I can fly through this because you've already heard about Anya, about all those amazing sessions that are taking place. It's a discussion forum, and you can see there are also a lot of national and regional IGFs that happen worldwide. So a lot of the input from these regions are going to go and meet up and discuss things. And I guess one of the big discussions always is about the concept of having a multilateral system or a multi-stakeholder system. And I wanted to finish on this, really. To give you an idea, a multi-stakeholder environment, which is what the internet has been built on mostly, is an environment with governments, civil society, private sector, and the individual users and the technical community and other stakeholders are able to talk together on a par basis. Everyone is able to contribute to the discussion, to the debate, and to a solution. A multilateral system usually involves each stakeholder group working at its level. So governments will work with government and private sector with private sector and so on. And usually it's the governments that make the final decisions. They may take advice from other stakeholder groups, but usually they take the decision. And so each of these two systems has some advantages and inconveniences. The advantage of multi-stakeholder, of course, I'm biased, I guess. So yeah, take my word for it. The advantage of the multi-stakeholder system is that because you get an early engagement from all the actors, you're actually going to get more buy-in from the actors. And although it might seem a waste of time to discuss things with so many people, once a solution is found, everyone is on board and you can really move forward. The difficulty is the more people you bring to the table, the more views there will be. So it's difficult sometimes to find consensus, especially if stakeholder groups have radically opposed ideas. And sometimes it has a tendency to be theoretical. Principles of this, principles of that. Let's agree to principles. But the thing is, of course, the internet is a reality. So you need to translate these principles to a reality. And another major problem, and I think some people will say, well, that is the major problem, is that some stakeholders are funded, governments, private sector, but what about civil society? What about end users? Some stakeholders are not well funded. And because a lot of these discussions take place face-to-face in the annual Internet Governance Forum, etc., it's been hard for some stakeholders to take part in those processes. Now, I guess, with the epidemic and everything happening online, it might well be that it basically flattens the board and it puts everyone on a par basis. There are tons of global events happening discussing internet governance. This is the 2019 travel document of a colleague of mine. There has been no 2020 case because, of course, the pandemic has completely thrown away any travel. But there is an equal number of conferences that have taken place online. So for many of us, using Zoom is not just an occasional thing, it's something that happens every day. Zoom and also other means of connection, of remote participation. Current challenges in the internet, there are tons of them. This fragmentation of the internet. The internet might fall apart. It is a network of networks. So you could think, well, that's kind of normal. Each network has its own sovereignty, you could say. And if a network wants to move on and do its own thing, then why not? But still, the difficulty at that point is that the fragmentation is going to make things a lot more complicated. And certainly when it comes down to connection across the world. Regulation is something that is in everyone's, in many governments' minds at the moment, because of the pandemic, because of the problem with cybersecurity and hate speech, and I guess there have been some problems, of course, brought with this free flow of information. Some are saying, let's regulate the internet. Well, you have to be careful here. Regulate what? Regulate the connection, regulate the content. This is a real thing that one has to make sure we're absolutely sure about, because some parts of the internet are already regulated. Telecommunications is already regulated as such, the technical part, So there's also a push for control by many governments on the one side that are saying they don't have enough control, but also by commercial entities, the big, I'll call them the big boys of this world that are effectively, they've got the connection, they've got the content, they capture all your information, they track you around. There are lots of problems with regarding privacy and data governance, all of that. So that's another challenge. Of course, the cybersecurity, and there is also finally the 5G and the Internet of Things. Not a challenge, I guess. That's an opportunity. It's going to be just so many new services that will be implementable by then. So what needs to be done? Well, the internet it's here, so you shouldn't miss it. It's already got about 30 years or 25 years of history, but we're still at the very beginning. As you can see, with all the new things coming up, there's a lot of work on the table. It's going to continue growing, and every business, everybody needs to be aware of that. Get ready for IPv6. It's a technical thing, but it's important because the protocol that Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn invented in 1974 with the small IP addresses is quickly going out of date. The new one is quite similar to this. It's just got more space. Get ready for any new technology out there, because I have seen so many technologies over the years and thought, that's never going to pick up. I mean, come on. Who's going to have a phone and be on their phone all the time? You can't even read stuff on your phone. The screen is too small. And guess what? Now we've all got the phones. We're all using the net on the phone. And please engage in those multi-stakeholder processes. Icann, the IETF, the World Wide Web Consortium, and the discussions in the IGF, which are starting there. Because without you, then I have no idea who's going to build tomorrow's network. So I guess it's now on your lap. It's your time to play ball. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. You've really taken us through the entire history of the internet really thoroughly. As a fresher, I can tell you that it's really been a one-on-one, like a complete 101 to the history of internet governance right up to where we are today. You've introduced us to some really interesting topics, which I'm sure, like the challenges, we will be taking up in the coming days as well. And it's really set the pace for the rest of the event. And I really thank you. And we've also been receiving a lot of messages on the chats saying that it has been really interesting and it's a very informative session. We have received a lot of questions throughout. So, and unfortunately, I do not think that we will have the time to take up all of them. Would it be okay if we send you the questions later? We've been noting down the questions. So would that be okay if we send you the questions later?
So we can do two things, because what I can do is to stick around and answer the questions on the chat now, if you want, for the next, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 minutes whilst somebody else is there. Or if you want, I can pick up the questions by email and answer them by email, as you wish.
Hi, Tavleen, can I come in here? Olivier, how about if you take two questions right now and then we can have the next over chat, because we really like to hear your opinions on two questions at least. Yeah. Tavleen, yeah, we can share the questions. You can read it out from the chat.
Right. So I'll just, from one of the questions has been from Dr. Abhishek Bhatia. He says, how do free market versus public intervention ideologies play a role in shaping the dynamics of internet governance regulations?
Wow, what a question. Do you have half an hour? It's interesting because the internet has grown so fast based purely on a free market economy. And this is why you end up with the early movers, the big, large US companies that started in the late 90s, having grown to a critical mass that enabled them to be able to go worldwide. In fact, back then, it was well understood that they had to go worldwide very quickly. I met with the guys from Yahoo in, I think it was in 96 or 97. They had signed up their 100th employee. And at the time, it was two guys. I was young as well back then, so we were three young guys. And these two guys who were wearing shorts tell me, oh yeah, well, this year we're going to do Asia, and next year we're going to do Europe. And then the third year will be worldwide. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is crazy. This is the speed at which, when you have a purely market-dominated economy, the speed at which this goes. Now, today, my feeling is that you do need to have a mix between the pure market economy and also a more intervention-driven economy. And why? Because of the fact that there is this imbalance. There are rules. There are rules worldwide. The World Trade Organization has rules on what a cartel is, and they have a rule on what unfair competition is. And when you have an overall domination of the market by a single player or a handful of players, it's not healthy for the world. And this is why I think that now a mix of the market economy, and also intervention is needed. To what level? I think that requires a lot of discussion, and I'd say there are a number of sessions in the IGF that will be treating this with people who are way more competent than me to make suggestions on this. So I'd suggest you check for the answer, further answer in the IGF.
I'm sure everybody will be joining the IGF, and we're all looking forward to that as well. Another question that was raised by Gautam Mishra was that, can you tell us about the management of the organization working towards the IG? How is it being managed so effectively with so many organizations working together?
Okay, so thank you. That's an interesting question as well, because it would suppose that there is an actual organization managing everyone else, and there isn't. The UN process for the Internet Governance Forum is an open process. It's just like it provides an open room, and it invites everyone to come in and talk, but it doesn't actually choose who is going to be talking to who and so on. There's no coordination between the players. So all of that might seem chaotic, but really it's the case of the United Nations keeping the door open for people to come in, and organizations and companies and private sector and governments to come in and talk to each other. The Icann processors have, well, Icann in itself is subdivided into different parts. So one specific to country code top-level domains, one specific to generic top-level domains, so the com, edu, these ones. And there's one relating to IP addresses, and there's also one relating to the country codes and so on, and to the security. So the different component parts in Icann. It's an open process, so everyone, again, is invited to take part. You can take part in the generic name supporting organization discussions. You can take part in the at-large advisory committee discussions. At-large is end users. And when you are a country code top-level domain operator, you're invited to take part in the discussions there. But of course, they just invite people. There's no overall coordination, and there shouldn't be, because if you have an overall coordination, you would have an overall control, and this is what you want to avoid, because you imagine how powerful is the internet. If there was a single entity being able to control this, you could immediately think of the conflicts that this might bring forward.
Right. Thank you so much. And for the rest of the questions, we will be sending them to Sir. And we're really happy with the engagement that we've received from all of you. I would just like to again announce that the hashtag that we've been using is hashtag Youth IGF. We'll put it in the chat as well. So if you're sharing anything, if you're tweeting out, if you're clicking any pictures, please tweet it out with the hashtag. It will be easy for us to track it. And we will now just go into the break and for 10 minutes, and we'll see you back at after 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for the session.